Hello and welcome to Conversations With, our monthly series of informal and enlightening conversations between the leading edge teacher and author, Jim Self, and some of today's most progressive and connected teachers, channels, and authors. Now, here's our host, Jim Self.
We'll get into very specifically today this shift as it relates to the Mayan calendar and the Mayan interpretation of the calendar. There is a lot of awareness of the Mayan calendar, and yet people think it's the end of time, it's a solar activity, it's the earth activity, the end of the world, etc. And yet the Mayan calendar doesn't say anything about those things. The Mayan calendar talks about levels of time and consciousness as interpreted by many of the Mayan experts around the world. Carl Calleman is one of those people who has spent an enormous amount of time understanding and working with the Mayan calendar, has published 3 books, has been very instrumental in organizing conferences, the convergence. And so I'm real pleased to have Carl be with us today. Carl, nice to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be with you here, and I'm looking forward to this.
Great. Let me ask, just to start kind of setting this up without being overly technical, because that's your whole expertise, is being technical. You know, people think the Mayan calendar is a specific series of dates that leads to, and many people think the year 2012, December 12th, 2012, but that's not exactly correct. There are 3 different time flows, if I'm not mistaken. There is something called the Zoltan time flow, which has 260-year cycles, and that goes back to, I think, 550 BC. And then there's another calendar or interpretation of the calendar called the long count that has 294 years in it. And then the short count is 19 years and 7 months. So there's a little bit of information that most people don't have, and I know this is where you have a lot of information. So could you just kind of clarify that? And are we looking at December 12th, 2012, or are we looking at something else? And I know you've got a lot of focus on one particular date coming up, March 9th this year.
Yes. I think to begin with, the way the Mayan calendar has been popularized recently is kind of misleading. It's coming from commercial television channels. It's coming from Hollywood movie 2012. It's also coming from a certain group of experts in the Mayan calendar who has tended to put the emphasis on a certain particular date. You know, even if I don't even agree with this date, I would like to begin by saying that I think this is misleading. My understanding of the Mayan calendar is that it's always related to processes. It's not about singular dates. And that's what makes it so special, and it's also what makes it so exciting for us as a possibility to be part of these processes, which are cosmic processes. What I consider as the central core of these processes is 13 steps that the Maya would always honor in their calendar systems. It's something that goes across the different systems. And basically 13 energies in a sequence, which are not identical. And they can be described partly as a wave movement of 7 peaks alternating with 6 valleys, if you like. Or you might say 7 periods of light that alternate with 6 periods of darkness. And in ancient times, these 13, which are reproduced on several different levels in the cosmic time plan, they were also described and symbolized by different deities, by different gods and goddesses that would symbolize the particular qualities associated with these time periods. For instance, the first of the 13 energies would be symbolized by the god of procreation. And so it's a starting point. And typically, if you ask a Mayan elder today who is well versed in the calendar, she will say that the 13 steps is like a process from seed to mature fruit. And it's these kind of organic processes of evolution that defines the Mayan calendar. And in fact, it goes even further, I would say. You may wonder, where does the name Maya come from? It's not so obvious, because if you actually go down to present-day Guatemala and Mexico, most people that are indigenous in this area do not necessarily identify with being Maya. We think they're Maya because it fits with what we've seen and learned in different documentaries and so forth. But they tend to identify rather with being Tzotziles, Carifundas, Quiche, or any of these different 23 language groups. So the Maya is actually an old name, and it's something that already Columbus encountered when he came to the New World and met a canoe of Mayans outside of the coast of Honduras on his fourth journey to the Americas. And Maya actually comes from a word which is May, which is actually the name for a process of 13 steps. And so Maya means the people of the 13. That's what it is. And this makes it very interesting, because some Mayan elders, not all, but some Mayan elders will say that anybody can be a Mayan. It depends on your cosmology. In other words, are you looking at the universe as a process of these kind of evolutionary progressions of consciousness, which is what these 13 steps are. So starting with this, I want to then de-emphasize any particular date, in the sense that some people will hold a particular date and say, that's the date when this or that is going to happen. And especially what I would say almost this silly date, December 21, 2012, where people, they focus all on the date, and then they wonder what will happen. And then all these documentaries say the world will come to an end, or will be a paradise or something. And I think anybody who's really seriously studied the Mayan calendar realizes that dates could be important as starting points, but they are related to processes. And it's these processes that give any date its particular meaning. I want to give as a fundamental basis for understanding the Mayan calendar that it's about processes in 13 steps, and that's what define Maya and the Mayan calendar.
So they're understandings of levels of consciousness, effectively.
I would say so. These steps of 13, they exist in very different ways, and you mentioned a few of them already. There is the so-called Solkin, the so-called sacred Mayan calendar of 260 days. And that's basically 13 steps of 20 days. So that's also the seed to mature fruit. Then you mentioned the long count, which is the one that started. It's a longer period. It's 13 steps, each of 394 years, which is a time period the Maya would call a Baktun. And it's leading up to our current time, but it started at the dawn of human civilization about 5,100 years ago with the emerging monarchies and city-states in Egypt and Iraq, the present-day Iraq and the Indus Valley. So there we have again these 13 steps, and it started with a very significant, the rise of the high civilizations that we know them, organized national life. And then you might see, if you start studying Mayan calendar in detail, you will see that each of the shift between these 13 different energies entails some kind of a paradigm shift, some fundamental new phenomena coming into existence on this path between the seed and the mature fruit. And these shifts it's not, as most people would think, it's not solar flares or asteroids destroying the Earth or volcanic eruption or something like that. That has nothing to do with the Mayan calendar. It's instead, it is about that these energies that are coming in, the 13 energies, they originate from what the Maya would call the heart of the heavens, the center of the universe. What you might say is the central world tree, the central tree of life, you might say, from which all of the calendrical cycles are emitted. So it's truly cosmic energies that are coming in and hitting our planet as well as all the other planets of the entire universe, as far as I can understand. Sure. And one important conclusion then is that we have here a calendar that's very, very different. It's not based, like the other calendars we're using, on some local astronomical cycles in our own solar system. Because our solar system is just a speck of dust in this galaxy, and our galaxy is a speck of dust in the cosmos. But we're talking about something, when I say cosmic calendar, I don't mean that lightly. I mean literally. It's a calendar that describes the evolution of life all across the cosmos, as far as I can understand it. These 13, of the 3 you mentioned, I now said 2 of them, and which was, the first one was the sacred calendar of 260 days, which is, it's sort of a microcosm of all the other calendar. It's a matrix of energies that the Maya have been following for 2,500 years at least, and are doing until this very day. It is a sacred duty to the elders, to the day keepers, to the medicine women down in Guatemala and Mexico, to keep this tradition of a certain energy associated with each of the 260 days. Then you mentioned another, the short counts, and it came out of the fact that as the Maya, 1,000 years ago, they abandoned this long count. And this is the reason that a lot of Mayan elders today will not want to say that there is some kind of an end date to the calendar, because that calendar that had an end date, if you like, hasn't been used by them for a long time. Instead, time speeded up, and that's part of the Mayan calendar system, that it exists at different levels that are activated according to a certain pattern. And each level holds a wave in 13 steps that has a higher frequency, a 20 times higher frequency than the one that they were was based on, so to speak. Right. I mentioned then that we had one big wave starting 5,100 years ago with the first higher civilizations. But then if you take just the 20th of that, then you come to another wave that started, literally speaking, in AD 7055. And that operates with a 20 times higher frequency. There, it's not a matter of 13 394-year periods, but 13 20-year periods, basically. And so the 13 steps there are, the shifts are happening with 20 times higher frequency between these energies. And there again, when that wave starts, we have an amazing paradigm shift in what it is to be a human being, and in her relationship to her world. Because that's the time of the Industrial Revolution, the time when machines came into use. And it's a time of a shift away from the monarchic systems of rule that had existed on the lower level, and instead came the American and the French revolutions at this time, and created a new system of governance. So each wave has some kind of a, you might say, preferred political system or system of rule. And that's just one of many different examples. Each wave also has a certain way of relating to nature, so to speak. for instance, then the shift in the fact that machines are coming into use at this particular point in time in around 1755. That just illustrates the seeding time, the steam engine, the spinning jenny, and these inventions in the British Isles in that first 20-year period of seeding would then be a seeding of industrial revolution. Then it's not a date that it happens. It just starts a process in that particular energy, and then gradually this process deepens, it diversifies, and comes to involve all aspects of life, and it spreads all over the world. That's sort of how the Mayan waves are operating and changing our world through changing us. That's why I think it's so misleading when people think that something will come from the outside and hit us, or whatever these catastrophe scenarios are implying. Because really what the calendar is about is waves coming from the center of the universe, from the holy heart of the heavens, and influencing our inner selves in such a way that we see the world differently, and as we see the world differently, we are recreating a new reality. And when a certain wave comes in, to take an example, suddenly people start to use machines. Suddenly people start to have revolution against monarchic rules, etc., etc., etc. And that doesn't come from any external things. It comes from the fact that the human perception of reality, human consciousness, is transformed in such a way that we start to create a new reality, and the world changes outside of ourselves.
So we've moved from this period of time, from the combines and picking cotton and et cetera in the 1700s, all the way into these very fast superconductor computers. And if my math is correct, we've just gone through, or effectively coming to I'm not going to say completion, coming to a point of the 13th cycle, coming to kind of an ending point, starting point of another cycle. Is that what's happening right now?
Yeah, well, I would say that the most basic and the fundamental structure of the Mayan calendar is the nine terraced pyramids. These were at the center of the sacred sites of the Maya. Anybody who is fortunate to go to this area in southern Mexico and Guatemala and parts of Honduras will find, for instance, in Chichen Itza, in Palenque, in Tikal, and several other places that there are, that in their center they have a pyramid that's built in 9 levels. These 9 levels are 9 levels of consciousness, each of which is developed by a wave in 13 steps that I just discussed. But as you can see, because the levels are becoming smaller and smaller, it's narrowing as we come to the top of the pyramid. That means that it's also becoming higher and higher frequency, shorter and shorter periods of time. And as you're saying, we have now come to one more level compared to the Industrial Revolution, where we quite recently came to the 13th step. That happened in November of 2010. And now we are gearing up for the highest level of the cosmic plan, which is the 9th wave. And that will start as of March 9th. But each of these levels, it carries a new, you might say, new frame of mind. It carries a new consciousness. It carries a new relationship to our environment, our surroundings. And that is what is being driven by, propelled by these waves, which makes it so fascinating, and also makes it, it almost tells us to how are we to relate to this wave, now that we at least have a lot of knowledge about the structure of the calendar system and our own place in it, and that's the whole important discussion that now is beginning, and we will have to continue.
So that creates the framework for how we get to view this shift of consciousness that many of us are calling it. And I mean, it's like a dawning of a day. It does, you know, as you say, it doesn't happen on a day, but that dawning has been coming for now a number of years, and more people are shifting into an inclination of co-creation and cooperation and an environmental balance. And that's what this next wave is really bringing forth.
Yes, I would say so. You might say that this eighth wave, which was a wave that started in early 1999, it certainly has brought one thing that was predicted then by myself and many other people, that it certainly has brought you might say, a cyber civilization into existence. Mm-hmm. That's really what it has carried. The other thing that is very marked is the fact on a global level, the Eastern and the Western hemispheres are now increasingly becoming balanced in terms of their power. And that's a new thing, because, you know, the 5,000 years that I mentioned earlier basically favored the Western hemisphere, and by resonance, it favored our left brain half, the kind of analytical, rational thinking that went with that field of consciousness, you might say. And it was the Western nations that spread this over the world. But the eighth wave that started in 1999 has had the opposite effect, and it's brought in intuition on a new scale. It's brought in the Eastern Hemisphere, and you can see how holistic thinking has been brought in, not the least, for instance, in medicine and so forth, where it comes from the Eastern inspiration to a large extent today. Surely today the relationship economically between the West and the East is much more balanced than it ever was before. And it's amazingly how quickly these big Asian nations like India and China have risen to become significant equal players on the world scale in terms of the world economy.
And also the consciousness in masculine and feminine, and a sense of appropriateness in interaction between peoples. That really has accelerated significantly in the last 12 years, effectively. And another component of that you might comment on too is time is going faster. I mean, virtually everybody agrees that time is going faster. And I know your awareness of that, maybe you can talk about this too, because this is an issue that I'm really excited about, and that is your awareness is that 20-time increase, 20 times the speed of time will step up, and that's what you're assuming or aware of is about to happen around this March 9th period of time. Is that accurate?
Yes, exactly that, like that. Yeah, so to begin with, yes, I think at least in parts of the world there has been a shift to feminine perspectives to a degree that wasn't there before. And that involves not only women but also men. And the perspective is sort of that of holistic, looking at the whole thing and not just analyzing, so to speak, and being in tune with what's out there and caring for what's out there. All of these things there are large parts of the populations that are affected by it. And what's interesting is that people in general, they will think that this is just happening and it's spreading because it feels like the right thing. Well, that may be true. That's maybe how we experienced it. But it doesn't answer then, why didn't people suppose, 2,000 years ago, when some very masculine, very dominating holy scriptures were written, why did they not have this inclination to the feminine side? So this is part of the shift that you're talking about, and what the Mayan calendar makes it so interesting is that it explains this. It doesn't really come from ourselves. It comes from a cosmic plan that shifts our perception, that shifts our consciousness. time acceleration is part of this. Why it is like that, I don't know, but it's just the cosmic intelligence seems to have designed it that way. We've already talked a little bit about it, that there are 9 levels each that is developed through 13 steps. The same order, same sequence of gods and goddesses that are marking these 13 energies. But what is different is that as we climb step by step up this 9-storied pyramid that I recommend that you look at, you may, if you go to the internet, you may take a look at the pyramid of the jaguar in Tikal, which is my favorite metaphor, or the pyramid of the plumed serpent in Chichen Itza, or the Temple of Inscriptions in Palenque, maybe the most beautiful of the Maya sites. But each level then develops by a certain rhythm, and with a frequency of shifts that increase 20 times as we climb it. Since we are, we human beings, we think we are the creators of the world. In reality, we are small little ants, I think. And we are the ants that are responding to different cosmic waves. And as the shifts have increased in frequency when we come to the higher levels, we have looked around and think it has seemed to us that everything is speeding up, time is accelerating, and I would say that that's a valid experience, but in the bigger picture, it is the divine process of creation that is speeding up. The frequency of energies from the divine is increasing.
From my perspective, what you're saying is actually really exciting. I have not quite heard it in the flow as you've just laid it out. From this point, where I step forward in a lot of the work that I do with the archangels, what you're saying makes an enormous amount of sense. What I'm observing occur is time is significantly accelerating, which supports your 20 times piece. What I'm also noticing is those 2 halves of the brain are beginning to be more balanced. Masculine and feminine nature, not in male bodies and female bodies only, but in the nature of the individual is coming into a balance. And in that process, the consciousness of each one of us is starting to become much more aware. Where I watch this shift coming, this next step, is that instead of extending your awareness externally, you're going to start to bring it internally. You're going to start to have a consciousness of these different aspects of what brought all this into place in the first place. And, well, who taught the Maya about the calendars, and where did all of that information come from? And my observation is each one of us are going to begin to start to function in different levels of consciousness, different realms of consciousness as this shift goes forward over these next couple of years. As we each play in that space, exactly what you just said, as the energy is made available, how will you choose? What will you choose? How will you choose to interact, to co-create, to create this beauty and well-being? That's what is this whole group who listens to this call is all about, creating those vibrational frequencies to set in place a momentum that will take us into this next realm. So that sound consistent with what I've read in your books?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, very, very exciting. It must be a wonderful journey you've been on to unravel all of this. I hope you appreciate yourself much.
Well, in certain ways, I feel I've really been very fortunate to be in that position. And there has been times when something has opened up, and then there's been times when sort of just information has come sort of day by day, moment by moment, just coming to me from the most seemingly unlikely sources. And I've been fortunate then to be in the position to formulate this in ways that I think are understandable to modern people. What might be special with my own background then and my own experience here is that I started started out as a scientist, as a laboratory researcher, worked as such for 20 years. And so for this reason, I always look for evidence. I always look for the for the hard evidence. And so
Sure.
People say, we don't need evidence. Well, maybe not, but some people definitely want evidence. And to me, that just strengthens. I think still we are in a world where evidence is needed, that we are in a transformational shift going through these different energies, because it's still a tremendous amount of people that are not aware of that and are not responsive to a cosmic plan, not even given the chance to choose it, as you're saying, to co-create. And so there is a need to provide, I think, information very much about what the Mayan calendar helps us do, is to look upon these things in a very rational way. And we don't have to believe anything, really. We just have to believe that our encyclopedias are basically holding the right information and that it makes sense, so to speak.
Well, you know, evidence is very important because it's people like you who leave the breadcrumbs for the rest of us to follow and become enlightened and have ahas in the experience. So evidence at the level where we're currently playing is really very important, I think, and many of us are waking up. We've been trained by a system that is not very forgiving and not very encouraging to be creative and to be curious and to follow that imagination. And so we need some of that evidence. What you've unfolded here is really, really quite great. But that shift is really something where, from what I watch, and I watch a lot of the students that participate, is even though everything is being laid out in front of you in terms of choices and opportunities and tools and skills, etc., there still is that question, what do I do next? And I think this whole awakening, in this speeding up that we're about to step into, even on a faster level, it's something where it's really all about the individual to start to say, I can do this, yes, and step forward. And that's the part that's so exciting right now. If anybody is doubting that this process is unfolding, I've, in my simpleness, I've said, watch world leadership, watch world economics, and watch the global warming factors that are playing in. And if anybody is questioning whether freedom is on the tip of many people's tongues at this point, you just have to look around the world. And it's not just in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya. It's all over the world that this evolution is stepping up, and people are just going to fall into place, and they're going to say, well, this is just the right thing to do, the correct thing to do, the appropriate thing to do. And that's what's so exciting about being in the wave that you're describing at this point forward. So very encouraging.
Yeah. Well, I actually saw somebody that had called for a World Freedom Day, March 5th, I think, or it was right before the beginning of this particular wave. And yes, but it's a freedom from dominance, other people's dominance.
Yeah.
And that's everywhere, even in China now, which we have thought of as such a dominated society, and it has been for sure. There's been these movements again, like 20 years ago. It's on a smaller scale, but it's people feel the same thing. It's been too much control.
Exactly. And it's not just in governments. It's not just in corporations. The piece that has really got to be dealt with is you and me, right inside, in the heart, how we begin to let go of our own limitations and beliefs and the past where we hold ourselves hostage and the future which we worry about. That is a sense of bondage in this whole process that is being nibbled away at. And that's the point that's most powerful, is the individual, what's happening. So. Yeah.
Basically, you're saying that we are enslaved by our own fear, maybe to some extent.
No, a very big extent. And that's what the opportunity of these waves of energy and these shifts of consciousness and these changes are really bringing about, I talk to people here in the West, and they're looking at Egypt, and some of them are going, gee, what's going to happen to our price of oil? The people in Egypt don't care about the price of oil. They're just all of a sudden finding a new sense of freedom. And so, yeah, the price of oil is going to have some effect. But the process of all of us becoming free is really the transition that we're watching. And we're in a very significant transition where the boat has left the dock, and the new port is not quite visible yet, but very much we are in a shifting sands and new waves of energy.
Yeah.
You want to add any more to this, and before we just kind of open it up to some questions? You're just a huge wealth of information and kindness. So.
Thank you. Yeah, well, there's a lot to say. I should mention I have my website, Calleman.com, which holds a lot of articles, and it sort of updates this because it's an unfolding of energies. They're coming in, they're increasing in frequency, or the shifts are increasing in frequency, and so it requires to be updated in order to follow along with this particular thing. So that's something I want to mention. I also want to mention that we have a website called treeoflifecelebration.com. What this is about is we are trying to bring people that want to be part of collectively celebrating this ninth wave to different kinds of events, to have that as a forum for them to interact. Some of us may be part of sort of organizing global events that I think could be very important because they are strengthening our sense of that we're not alone, that there are many of us that have the same intention and want to go. And then it's the whole thing about how we are adapt as individuals to these shifting energies. That's something where I feel very much that there's not just one individual that can sit and say, this is the way you should do it or anything like that.
Yeah, sure.
Co-creation means participation of all of us, I think. And we really have to take that really in. And so anyway, I do want to invite everybody to look at both my own webpage, which is more sort of theoretical information, Calleman.com, and also the treeoflifecelebration.com, which is about coordinating and organizing collective processes and discussing, how do we relate to the shift. Yeah, I think I might stop there.
If you enjoyed this episode of Conversations With, join Jim Self on the third Tuesday of every month on the Awakening Zone Network at 5 p.m. U.S. Central Time for more stimulating discussions with leading-edge teachers, authors, and channels. If you're looking for free tools for your personal and spiritual growth, if you want to be who you came here to be, visit masteringalchemy.com, where you can learn more about Jim, his work, and future guests on this show. We also have a Facebook fan page, Mastering Alchemy with Jim Self. Our theme song is Hands of Love by Barry Goldstein. May you experience laughter and grace on your journey home.